What's up, everybody? It's your good friend Lukey, and I'm back with my buddy Dakota for what will one day be renamed Boxing with Dakota and the Big Dog, but it's not quite that day yet. So we will start this show with what probably everyone is tuning in, our loyal listeners, our friends, about Lamont Roach and Gervonta Davis. The title to this show is Did Lamont Roach Beat Gervonta Davis? So I will throw the question to you, Dakota. Did he beat him?
In my opinion, I thought he edged it, right? And so when I feel like a guy edges it and it's a draw, I'm not going to be infuriated. If they had given it to Tank, I would have been. But I did think that Lamont did enough to edge it. And I think that, when you're fighting a guy who's as big of a star as Tank, there's so many things working against you. And, he let his performance really do the talking for him. And I think that's why he got a draw. Like, he fought so well that they couldn't really rob him. And it's unfortunate that the knockdown wasn't scored a knockdown. I'm not sure why, like, the rule didn't apply to Tank for 5 seconds and he could just get his face wiped off and whatever. But it is what it is, and no ref is perfect. Steve Willis has always done a pretty good job, but that was definitely not his best moment. But the simple answer is yes. I think he did enough to edge him out.
Well, and I should clarify we should assume there are people watching this that didn't watch the fight or didn't get to see the fight. So in the 9th round, I would say by the 7th round, it was clear the right hand of Lamont was affecting Gervonta Davis, and he was making audible reactions, and the right hand left hook combination counterpunching Gervonta. So what I was seeing in this fight was Gervonta was being forced to lead the action, and he's a counterpuncher. So Lamont was putting on educated pressure and really forcing him kind of to be a stressed out, neurotic person, to best put it. And what I mean by that is he made Gervonta force and engage in the fight, but Gervonta was the one that had to initiate the action, where Gervonta likes to casually move around and then look to land what I'd say is athletic or flashy maneuvers that he's very good at. He's very good at pull counters and straight lefts, and his hand speed is ridiculous, and he's very good at those things. So Lamont set a tone early in this fight of pressure, but educated pressure, and forcing Gervonta to be engaged the whole fight. And I think that's a key word to this breakdown, is the engagement. Gervonta at times did not look focused. He lost his concentration in this fight, but I'd say that what I'm leading to with this knockdown is my perception of the fight. In the 7th round, it felt like the right hands and the left hooks started to make Gervonta make faces, and he was showing some frustration like he did in the Pitbull Cruz fight. And it was very out of character. It was obvious he was not having a great hang in there. And in the 9th round, he gets hit with a jab and something's wrong, and he just takes a knee. And that is inexcusably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It appeared the referee, Steve Willis, was counting, but then he didn't. And then they went to the corner, and then that was followed also by, I believe, the next round, where 10 seconds into the round, he's just still in the corner and he's taking breaks in the fight. So I think mentally Davis was having an issue with being engaged in this fight. I'm not sure if he took...
Because it was uncomfortable, I think.
It was uncomfortable. And there was starting to be it was very clear that the Roach family knows something about Davis and his mentality, and they applied something. And this goes back to a text that you sent me. So maybe why don't you build off of what I'm saying?
Well, I think it's a perfect segue. When I got to talk to Jordan Roach and Big Ben yesterday, one of the things that Jordan said to me, and it's on the interview on ITR Boxing right now, is he said, Tank has mental problems in the ring. And I didn't know what he meant by that. I really didn't know really what he meant by that. And he said, I'm just going to leave it at that. Anybody who grew up with him knows what I'm talking about. And truly, I was just like, all right, I'll take your word for it. Maybe, that he saw something in a gym when they were all 10 years old and somebody made him cry and they're holding on to that. I don't know what the fuck they're talking about. But we saw a little bit of what Jordan was saying, right? nobody's been able to make him that uncomfortable and really bring it out of him. He's been more talented and he's had everything in his favor in all of these fights. But here he is, a 30-year-old man. He's been fighting once a year for years now. He hasn't been an active champion, and he's got this guy in his prime who can take his punch and isn't going anywhere. And he wasn't prepared for that level of discomfort, whereas it felt like Lamont was kind of in that I'm willing to die tonight mode. And ultimately, I think it sort of evened itself out, right? Because Tank still landed some huge shots and did a lot of Tank Davis type things. The difference was Roach's both ability to take the shots and his defensive ability, right, to do kind of what Fury did with Wilder in their second fight, which is put foot pressure on a power puncher and force them onto their back foot. So, you know, there was a lot of great things that Lamont was doing in there. I think he was throwing types of combinations in the pocket that you really got to have some balls to do with a puncher like Tank. But like Jordan said, bro, they kind of knew something that we didn't know. And I didn't even really know what he was talking about until I watched it happen. And all of a sudden he's getting his face wiped and he's complaining to the ref and he's 10 seconds in the corner and he's taking a knee. There was a lot of things where it's like, okay, he is kind of, he's a little bit checked out on how uncomfortable this is.
Yeah, to me, the thing about Lamont, and I thought the broadcast did a weird job because they're like, you can't stand right in front of Gervonta Davis. And it felt as though there was a deliberate strategy by Roach to be right in front of him and to psychologically make it uncomfortable that your best shots don't impact me. So I felt like the beginning of the fight didn't really set. That's why I miss Lampley, because I feel like that some of these things we used to, or like with Kellerman, like I miss Kellerman where he'd reflect and ask a question to an expert commentator saying, what do you see, Roy, right here? And it felt like this fight was like, there were two halves on the call. And I think the call is important to talk about because it's how a lot of people remember it, where the first half was, what is Roach doing? He's coming forward. And the second half is Roach is making Gervonta really uncomfortable, and Gervonta
and initiating. I also thought, you know, particularly in the second half, there was a lot of exchanges. Lamont was just initiating. He was just stepping the Tank, letting go of the two down low to the body, and then kind of using an angle. And he was the one initiating a lot of the exchanges in the second half.
Let's get to some of the questions in the chat. Al the Pal, people break bones, dislocate bones, and don't take a knee. Excuse a little hair grease in my eyes. Our buddy Jesus M, Fake Nello, as always. Saludos. Jack Kelly, the legend. Tank doesn't seem like his heart is in it anymore. Always talking about retirement. He should just do it if he ain't all the way locked in. Not the sport to have 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And I definitely feel a bit of what the legend Jack Kelly's saying, because I just don't think Gervonta. I think it's more of a career to him at this point. I don't see the
passion.
Has
a shelf life. Yeah, that shit has a shelf life, bro, of just like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I mean, we're talking about the inactivity. We're talking about, you know, a couple weeks ago, he's talking about, oh, I'm ready to retire. And we still haven't even hit that crescendo of him fighting the other greats of his era. And it seems like he's kind of already, you know, prepared to tap out on boxing. It may just have been enough for him. And I think unless he's willing to fight multiple times a year and consistently take interesting opponents, you're only going to see Tank get worse from here. You can't, it's hard to maintain, you know, at the highest level and you don't fight.
Yeah, I also would like to add that it's a tough thing because he hasn't really fought his contemporaries. He's fought good opponents, but it's really hard when you have Shakur Stevenson, Devin Haney. Yeah, he fought Ryan Garcia, but when he fought Ryan, we weren't really sure where Ryan stood in the division. Now Ryan's kind of, that win ages a little better, but there's been guys like Lomachenko in 2020 was there. Teofimo was there. And I guess the one thing is, like, whenever you have these performances, and we're going on what, Dakota, 7-8 years of him being a really top name in the sport, and he just hasn't had those historical legacy defining fights. He's more so taken on interesting opponents that were profitable, that were attractions, but we haven't gotten those 50-50 per se matchups with guys of his era in the division, I feel.
Well, and then when we talk about attractions, right, it's like the big fight is a bigger attraction. There's no disrespect to Frank Martin or any of the other, solid opponents that he's taken recently, but like the big fights are going to sell more. So I still don't, that whole thing is like, you're still leaving money on the table. And if these guys are only about money, like that's the disconnect for me. Interesting question from Jesus M. I don't know the answer to that.
What do you mean from Jesus? Boxers in there. I want to see him at 100% or just step away a bit to reassess. He's lacked focus and doesn't seem to care. I mean, the big thing for me in this focus was his lack of focus. He just did not seem engaged at all with this fight. What shouldn't be lost is Lamont showed up and did his thing. Moment was too bright. I had it 7-5 for him, Lukey. You called it. Lamont timing was his biggest asset. I think also it was like Lamont didn't see Gervonta as a pay-per-view star. He saw him as a guy he knew, and he fought him like a guy he knew, and that was very evident to me.
Yeah, there was a familiarity where it's like, oh, everyone's afraid of you and your power. I know what you really are. You know what I mean?
So we'll end this segment with like trajectories. Does Gervonta return this year, and does this spark a fuse where he becomes that guy? Because like you're someone that's been higher on Gervonta. I don't have him in my pound for pound list. Some guys have him in their pound for pound list. Do you think this inspires him to have a lot of more performances and to get better? Do you think this is the start of a bad part? And conversely, does Lamont Roach start to enter into the conversation of a pound for pound level fighter?
Well, I'm of the mindset of you keep what you kill, right? So for me, Lamont probably, I always maintain a top 15. I think Lamont takes that 15 spot after a performance like that. You beat a guy that's in the list, or in my mind, you beat a guy, it winds up being a draw. I think you earn your position. For Tank, it's like it's gonna go one of two ways. He's either gonna have, a part two of his career that's maybe a little more disciplined and has some more regular activity. Or this is kind of the beginning of the end. And because he looked a little more vulnerable, the Keishans and the Shakurs and the other, top killers at this weight are really going to want those fights. And I think if he takes any of them right now in this version of himself, he's not winning them. And I think that Lamont, they're going to do a rematch. And I think that the rematch is super important. I hope that Lamont doesn't, hang his head on the fact that it was a draw and doesn't go and try to like make this massive adjustment. But he will, I think, especially early in the fight, he's going to have to do something to separate himself just a little bit, I think, to get a decision over Tank.
First, the scoring of this fight too strange. Tank takes a knee in the 9th round. Someone scored that round for Tank. Not sure. Let me pull this up on CompuBox, but I'm almost positive Tank won a round where he didn't land a punch in. Does that sound accurate to you?
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. I thought that Lamont won the first 3 rounds, and then, Larry Hazard, I think, had it 2-1 for Tank. He's obviously the unofficial scorer, but I'm looking at it like, okay, well, if the other judges have it the same way he does, and we score the rest of the fight the same way, we're going to have a 2-point difference in a fight. So I had it 7-5 Lamont, and Larry had it 7-5 for Tank.
So the first round, Gervonta landed 1 punch, and Roach landed 3 punch, and Roach outlanded him. And I believe multiple judges gave Tank that round. So I mean, that's pretty.
But that's the superstar default, right?
That's the default.
If Lamont doesn't, clearly take it, they're just going to default to a 10-9 for Tank.
Couple more questions in the chat before we move on. What do you think of Steve Willis was thinking during the moment of the knockdown? I'll tackle this first, and then I'll give it to Dakota. I think that you hit it on the head, the superstar default. I think that there's a level of intimidation when you're a working class guy. And a lot is going through your mind. Oh my God, I don't want to be in infamy. And I think Steve overthought the moment, because I think that there is a level of these superstar boxers that can bully the officials. And you saw it in this fight where
Floyd used to do it all the time.
He was talking back about what was a low blow. And, I think that the problem was he gave Tank the benefit of the doubt in a situation where he should have just counted. What do you think, Dakota?
I think that's a fair assessment. I think that there's like a, even though Steve is the official in the fight, there is sort of like a power imbalance in terms of, who's bringing the value tonight, who's brought all the people into the arena. And I think that because they're the sort of the breadwinner of the night, like Floyd was, they feel a little entitled to tell people to do as they see fit.
I also think that if that situation happened with Lamont Roach, he wouldn't have gotten the benefit of the doubt. It's very much an A-side thing. And it's a very much like, I think, intimidation. And it's not like anyone's done it, but it's just the way, knowing that there's people that make a lot of money and you're in this position, and just like what is going on. I think it's that type of situation. I think there's a lot of fear involved in being like a referee. You work your way up to this position your whole life, and now you're in these big spots. And like, for most referees, they probably hope for a clean, seamless fight where they're not even a topic of the conversation. And then something happens and you have to make a decision in 5 seconds that people are going to talk about for 25 years.
That cost Lamont the decision also. It wasn't just a blunder. It was a fight deciding mistake.
So Bipolar Boxing said Tank said he's going to fight again before he rematches Lamont Roach. He should give an immediate rematch to help people possibly forget that performance. So I did notice that in the press conferences that he said he has another fight before the rematch. I have no clue what that fight is. But like, do you think that Tank returns in this year, or do you think he's back in 2026?
I think if he's back this year, it'll be against Roach. But I mean,
But he said in the press conference he's not going against Roach next.
Yeah, but he also said he was going to retire in 8 months or whatever the fuck he said. So I think Tank says what he's feeling in the moment. I don't think he's thinking real hard about what he's saying. I think he feels what he's feeling and he's saying what he says. And like Tyson Fury, like a lot of fighters, especially post-fight, those things can all change.
So our good friend Boxing Learner, a great person to follow. Very wrong what they did. The referee should have done better. The rules. Yep. An immediate rematch would be the right thing to do. I agree. Yeah, we both agree. So let's go to the co-feature now, and let's talk about Gary Antaunne Russell's star-making performance dominating Jose Valenzuela.
I did not call that one, bub. I mean, Rayo had kind of a career-defining performance against Cruz where he boxed beautifully. Obviously, Cruz not the most technical guy, but Rayo showed a certain level of IQ. Russell coming off a decision loss to Puello, and I think that was quite some time ago. I've always thought that Antuanne Russell was a hell of a fighter. You know what I mean? But I just thought that the momentum was such that, Rayo would just have a little bit more juice. But man, he looked flat from the beginning, and it felt like Gary Antaunne just fought the perfect fight, man. He just out hustled him. He had fast hands. He was throwing hard. He was creating angles. He was bullying Rayo, and he could take Rayo's punch too. And so I definitely did not rule out the fact that Gary could win that fight, but I didn't see it being like a real ass whooping. And that's what it was, man. He really whooped on him.
Jesus M. Rayo, horrible performance. Jack Kelly, Gary Antaunne Russell at his best is a tough night for anyone. His whole family is class. It was great to see how much that meant to them. This is going to become a great story, living our father's legacy. Rayo versus Kambosos, Rayo versus Sandor Martin. Rayo looked weight drained. A lot of comments in there. I'm holding off on the Tank versus Schofield or Ray Ford next, because I just don't know if those are fights that would happen. For me, the fight, what I saw was Gary Antaunne Russell had his distance and timing really early in this fight. And he's a guy that when he gets his distance and timing, he's a tough dude to beat, because he's one of those guys that when he gets that locked in, he has great reflexes. He's got a deeper amateur pedigree than Valenzuela, Rayo. And once he got into cruise control, I think the one thing, if I were to criticize Gary's performance, was it did feel like at times there was a possibility for a stoppage, and he really wanted the win, so he didn't go for that to look for the stoppage. He went to win the fight, which I don't discourage. But I do think he could have closed the show in some of those later rounds, but he knew he was so far up. But I mean, it was pretty much a flawless victory against a fighter in Rayo who had a star-making performance against Isak Pitbull Cruz. He became a guy that was kind of a breakout guy. And Russell, in regards, kind of went the other way last year. He lost to Puello, and I think a lot of people wrote him off. And now he's completely reinvented himself, and now there's conversations about him being one of the best. Whereas Valenzuela, after that big win, now we have to reassess what he is.
Right. I don't know what to make of him now. And I guess my initial instinct, aside from the fact that Gary Antaunne fought a beautiful fight, I think Rayo's very inconsistent. And I'm not sure what the inconsistency, I don't know if it's effort or if it's passion or if it's preparation. There's a million different things, but fighting such a disciplined fight against Cruz and then coming in on this one and just looking lost the whole time. I just can't remember the last time even any Robert Garcia fighter got beat up on and looked that lost in a fight. And I have to think that, something was off. I don't know. That's not to take away from Russell. I just feel like, it just wasn't this, to some extent, it wasn't the same guy.
Do you think that Rayo fell in love with being able to box, and that maybe took away from some of his inherent strengths of being a puncher who comes forward?
I don't know. Maybe this is all just theories, but maybe beating Cruz, he thinks, I'm gonna be a pay-per-view headliner now. And the magnitude of this fight may have been a bit of a letdown for him. And meanwhile, he's in with a real killer. So it may just have, he wasn't taking him serious the way he should have, because it wasn't exactly what he wanted.
Gary's brother was telling him not to force a knockout. Rayo's horrible defense.
I think that was smart, because at the end of the day, he just stayed within himself and just dominated every round, I think. So I don't know. It was kind of a 10 out of 10.
Rayo looked confused early, almost like he was surprised by the speed. Hard to imagine Robert Garcia didn't have a better game plan. Gary Antaunne Russell was just a better fighter, bipolar boxing. I think also sometimes you get in there with a guy who's technically better and has fast hands, and fights just don't go the way that you think. Even if you have a great game plan, it's hard to make up for like physical differences. Like we talk about that fast hands, Joe Parker. Sometimes it's hard to fight a guy who has fast hands. Let's go to the fight I was joking about with my girlfriend that you probably loved, which is Sandor Martin versus Albert Puello. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I thought Martin won the fight. It's not the first time that Sandor Martin has gotten the short end of a stick in a title fight like this, right? The Teofimo fight was very much the same way, very close, but it just feels like he had the upper hand. Again, I've heard you say you think Puello is the guy at 140. I think he might be 0 for 3 for me. But at the end of the day, there's something about what he does that is very effective. I'm not saying he's not a tricky guy and he's not going to have a close fight with every guy in the division. But I didn't think he beat Akhmedov, and I don't think he beat Martin. So it's a little tough for me to figure out what to make of him.
I mean, to me, what I saw in this fight was the classic fight of two guys who were like the Spider-Man meme, who are like the same guy. And they're fighting a very comparable fight with each other. And what I saw, and this is just my perception, was neither guy really took control of the fight or took over the fight. I think that I saw with Puello and Martin, they're both kind of risk adverse. Neither guy took that chance to really clearly take over the fight. I think Martin had the more flashy moments in the fight, and you could say that he won the fight. But I think that this is the classic, very close fight where when it goes to the judges, like you're going down to what people favor. Both guys kind of fought a drawish fight. They both had their moments. I didn't love how Martin finished the fight. It felt like he was kind of asking for trouble, like the way the fight concluded. But like also the way the fight started, he started about as good as he could have. So, I mean, I just think that it was a fair result. Not every close fight is a robbery. But I just think that with Sandor Martin, he's got to take some more risks at this point in his career to maybe get those decisions because the judges don't reward him. And with Puello, it just seems like maybe his punch volume or what he's doing, it's something that the judges do reward. But it was a close competitive title fight with two guys who I'd describe as spoilers. And when you put two spoilers together, you're not going to get a scintillating matchup. This is a matchup where both me and my girlfriend were reading The Economist while watching the fight. Like, this was a fight where we couldn't be engaged every second of every round.
Yeah, I enjoyed the tactics and the chess battle of it. And I did feel like, Puello had the kind of bigger individual shots, but it just felt like Martin's flurries were carrying more rounds for me than for Puello. And I think you're right to some extent. There's things that he can do to separate himself, but it's just like, it seems like he's just beaten two of the top guys in the division and he's 0 for 2. And that just doesn't sit well with me, regardless of if he could have done better.
I mean, I think the real guys in boxing look at him and know he's a guy. So he's got a promoter, Top Rank, and that should lead to opportunities. And I think we all.
It's just tough though, Lukey, because there's no moral victories, and once people get comfortable with you losing close decisions, they'll just let you keep losing close decisions. You know what I mean?
Well, it's kind of like the opposite of superstar treatment, right? So if it's a swing round, I feel like Martin's starting to get in that zone where it's like, I think the champion. But I think this is also like, I hate to go back to boxing cliches, Dakota, but this is the classic. You got to take it from the champion. And I'm not sure he quite did enough. They were 50-50 in my opinion. And if it's 50-50, 6 rounds, champion leaves with the belt. I didn't really feel like Martin, those last few rounds, it was very unsatisfying for me. It felt like he really had a chance to really separate and take over the fight, and he didn't quite do it.
I think the only difference, and we can leave it at this, but the only difference for me is I felt like it was a 60-40 fight. And I think he's had 2 60-40 fights in a row with two guys who are titleists, and he's 0 for 2. And like I said, that just doesn't sit well with me.
Bipolar boxing. I thought Sandor won clean punching in most rounds and neither won effective aggression. Those are the first two criteria. Thought Sandor won. Puello lost, according to our guy, Barack. And Barack, if this is your first time on the channel, thank you for coming in. We really appreciate
you, boss.
We appreciate you. Let's touch on the other two fights that we should touch on here. Yoenis Tellez beats Julian Williams, and Johan Gonzalez beats Jarrett Hurd. Where do you want to start?
Well, I just want to say, man, the Tellez and Williams fight was a beautiful fight to watch, man. I mean, Tellez is a really good young fighter. Maybe he's not as aggressive as people would like, but he's a good, accurate power puncher with a great defense. He's aggressive, but he's still got the basic Cuban mentality. And I felt like J-Rock fought a really smart fight. Tellez would take advantage of those little moments, right? We talk about little moments. He's really good at capitalizing on those. But, Julian fought a smart fight. His feet looked good. He looked strong. He was super competitive against a guy that's 10 years younger. This was one of those that was like really competitive and not that close. I think I had it 9-3, but there was a ton of rounds where it was like Julian just kind of came in second, but he didn't do anything wrong. And so I think for Tellez, it shows to some extent the level that he's at. And I think for J-Rock, at least for me, it keeps him relevant at junior middle or at middle.
To me, Julian fought a great fight. He started out about as good as you could. To me, it also showed Tellez must hit really hard
He
because
hits hard as shit, bro.
he hits really hard, and he fought like a guy who hits hard, and he had like a very systematic, slow approach where he's like, when I hit you, it's going to slow you down. It's going to accumulate. After the first round, Julian's eyes were starting to show damage. Yes, he's been a fighter for probably, I don't know how many years, 16, 10, 12 as a pro. Like he's had a long career, right? So damage accumulates over time. But just seeing Julian, I didn't really even feel in that first round he got hit with that many glancing punches. And to see the accumulation on his face kind of told me Tellez is a little bit better than I thought, because that was pretty impressive that really he didn't land a substantial punch, in my opinion, and they were marking up a former champion.
Right.
So to me, Tellez is a guy, I still think he could have issues with a mover, a guy in his prime, because he doesn't really have answers besides power for that.
But he's kind of like Murataya. You know what I mean? Where it's like sometimes it looks a little one speed, but it's a slow boil, and he doesn't get hit a lot in return, and so it's not like he's slowing down. I just think being able to maintain something for a whole fight is a skill, and I think that's something that Tellez has, is he can just keep doing what he's doing.
And his identity is undeterred, right? So like he knows who he is. He's a pressure guy. He's going to come forward. He's looking to land clean punches. And sometimes that's a skill in and of itself, knowing what brings you to the dance. Let's talk about Johan Gonzalez beating Jarrett Hurd. Jarrett Hurd retires after the fight. I mean, Gonzalez, we know what he is. He's a good veteran. I guess we call him gatekeeper, good veteran gatekeeper. And Hurd at this point, he retires after the fight. It's just, everything that made him great as a fighter, he doesn't really have anymore. The durability, the physical toughness. It really feels like the Julian Williams fight and the Erislandy Lara fight took a lot out of his career. And he's just never been the same guy after those fights.
No, and I think even in some of the fights after that, where he's tried to come in as more of a boxer puncher, I thought he looked pretty good at that. It just, he never put all the pieces together. And in this one, he just looked like he was kind of uncomfortable and suffering the whole time, regardless of what Gonzalez did. And so I'm glad that he retired, because in his day, he was such an unbreakable force. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't
a will guy. He had a really strong will, and he put his will on you, and he beat more talented fighters. But it's definitely obvious that he's not the same guy. And if he keeps going,
bro.
It's not good.
It's a wrap. And I think this is the one. I don't think there's been other fights. A lot of his other fights since the J-Rock fight, I've gone, he's not quite the same, but I never thought, oh, he looks shot. There's nothing left. And in this one, you know, Gonzalez is a tough guy, but he's super hittable, and Hurd was hitting him a lot, and it just didn't look like he had the juice to keep up.
I had to change my name. It was an old one. So what's it called? So let's move over to Subriel Matias. Subriel Matias gets a win this weekend. He's now the #1 contender for Richardson Hitchins. Dominant one-sided performance. Looked like the guy we fell in love with. Weaponized a pace against Valenzuela. Forced Valenzuela to fight way too fast, way too early. Opens up a cut. Valenzuela, great politician, negotiates 2 times with the doctor to extend the fight, then gets stopped. Really, really interesting fight. I think Hitchins versus Matias is a really good fight. Any thoughts on this?
I mean, Matias he's a beast, bro. Like, he does that thing that Beterbiev does, where he touches you while he's moving forward and kind of puts you where he wants, and then he rips, you know, hard shots. He's less of a one-punch guy, I think, than Beterbiev. It seems like, especially the older he gets, he's becoming more of an accumulation guy, which is, you know, is certainly a talent. I just don't know if he has the skill set to build that accumulation on a guy like Hitchins. and make him comfortable over or uncomfortable over a 12-round fight enough to win rounds. But if he's the mandatory, then he deserves it. And I think that he's still, as exciting a guy as he's ever been.
Yeah, I think he's a great addition to any division. When you put him in with big name fighters, you might not be excited at first, but he's going to make for great action fights. And there's always high drama because if he gets going, he can really put a lot of pressure on guys and beat guys. So I think there's always a ton of drama around the fights that he's in. And he's an interesting character in that regard. So I'm quite excited about what the future holds kind of for him.
That being said, I do think Hitchins is going to give him a boxing lesson, to be honest.
Probably. But the undercard, you didn't watch it, but we'll just touch on the undercard real quickly. Wasn't really like a super notable undercard. Alfredo Santiago, who's the number 1 contender for the junior welterweight division.
Man. He's good.
He stops Javier Fortuna. Fortuna's really a junior lightweight. He'd won a title at that division, now fighting at junior welterweight. Your guy, Mark DeLuca, I believe, saw him in the corner. Fortuna came in overweight. He tried to kind of blitz him early. He didn't really have that gas tank for the second half. Corner stops it starting the 9th round. Good win for Santiago, but
Fortuna's had a weird couple of years here because he was such a serious guy at one point, and now it just seems like he's just like a B-side with kind of a name. But I haven't seen him compete in so long.
Yeah, I mean, he was very formidable early in this fight, and he just didn't have the tank to keep going. Hitchins just talked about moving up this week. He doesn't like the IBF rehydration requirements. Okay, so then there might be an IBF. Yeah, I mean, that's fine. I thought Sandor barely won, but when you're up against the champ, I always say you have to knock him down to win. Gregory Edwards. I mean, that's not a bad motto, is that like you should really, really make a statement. Evening, Lukey. Davis, lucky, man. Thank you, Martin Mulligan. So let's go to our next. Oh, and then the other thing, kind of notable, this is a Dakota Feel Spot one. Ndongeni, when I went to film in Shreveport, Louisiana, and watched Devin Haney fight him, he beats Nestor Bravo, an undefeated Puerto Rican fighter, gets a split decision. So kind of a guy who had given Muratalla a tough fight. And
he's a good fighter, bro. He's not
B-side now, comes and beats an undefeated 31-year-old prospect. Pretty big win. And I hope it gets him like an opportunity against a big fighter. I think Salida has Joshua James Pagan and some guys there. Like that would be a fight, like Ndongeni versus Pagan would be a good one. So always nice to see like a veteran blue collar guy who trains hard win a fight.
Yeah, and he's good, man. I mean, I remember watching the Muay fight and thinking, this is not going to be the last big fight we see him in.
Would you like to take the Paddy Donovan call, or do you want me to start off with what happened?
So I've seen the replay. It seems like the right call to me. I'm not sure what the controversy is. The bell sounds, and like a second and a half later, he hits him and drops him, and it doesn't look like the guy can continue. It's unfortunate for Donovan, and I'm sorry that it played out that way. I don't think he did it on purpose, but and correct me if I'm wrong, but it just seemed like the sort of common sense call.
I guess my problem with it is, where's the referee? Because it's like the sequence of events is Donovan is winning the fight. Donovan's taking over the fight. There's a lot of enthusiasm. He's looking for a stoppage. He knows the round is ending. There's a lot of noise. He may or may not have heard the bell because there's a lot of noise. Why is the referee out of the picture for that sequence? Why is the referee saying round over? Why is there not a hand in the action? To me, why I don't like the call and I don't like the disqualification is this impacts Paddy Donovan's career in a way in which he was having one of the best performances, if not the best performance of his career. And there was no clear guidelines specifying how he should fight, how he should react in that given moment. The referee was out of the picture, which I think in a fighter's mind tells them, hey, this guy, this guy, I'm good. You know, there's still time to work. Like, I feel like if the referee's closer, they're going to think the round is closing to an end or a stoppage is near. I feel like because the referee was so out of the picture, that's where the punch coming is an issue, because you need to specify that.
Yeah, I don't think that the ref had enough clock awareness in that moment. I think that that's a good point, but it was enough after the bell to me where it just seemed like obvious. And I know that there's momentum when you got a guy hurt and you're not necessarily, that's why I said I don't think he did it on purpose. I just think it is what it is. And by the way, a DQ loss is like, who
I just
cares?
see it as a boom, boom play. So, like, I almost feel like he's shifting his weight to the right hook. And as he's shifting, the round's over. So that's where you need a ref to step in and possibly take one for the team.
I agree.
Because it's hard when that bell sounds. If a guy's sitting on a punch and transitioning, they might not be like, let me pull the shot, you know? So
yeah,
I didn't love it, because I felt like the reason I didn't love it is I feel like the wrong guy won. I feel like Donovan should have won the fight with the way the fight was going. And I feel kind of like a technicality with the rules got awarded a victory to someone that wasn't going to win the fight. And now it complicates things. Now we have to do a rematch where it's all about kind of a sequence of events rather than the performance inside the ring. So I think it's a great learning lesson for referees. I think this weekend was the weekend of referees. Like, if you go to a conference, Sole Arbiter or friend Jack Reese, if you go to that conference, this is probably going to be what they do. But I didn't love it, because to me, it felt like if Crocker gets out of that round, that outcome was going to happen in the next round. And I feel like decisions need to come down to who was the right guy that was going to win the fight. And not to say Crocker didn't deserve to win the fight, but I feel like the way the fight was trending, he wasn't going to win the fight.
I also think a better way to have dealt with it would have been to immediately take a point away from Donovan, send them back to the corners, and let the next round resume. Right? I mean, wouldn't that have made sense?
Well, Crocker was unable to continue.
But maybe he would have been able to continue with a minute break. I don't know.
But that, he was unable to continue, and Donovan had already been deducted a point.
So what's the right call?
I mean, it's one of these situations where there is no right call, right? Because the right call would have been the ref being closer to the action, clarifying the round is about to be over. I need you to stop at the break. And when that bell sounds, making a motion. So if Donovan punches after the motion, it's a clear disqualification if he can't continue. For me, the issue is there was to my perception, now if video comes out or something comes out and people can see it, that might change my opinion. But I think that there needed to be more guidelines, because the fight was trending to an emotional crescendo at the end of the round. And Donovan's looking for an emphatic career-defining stoppage, and there needed to be, I need you stopping at the break, or there needed to be an arm in there. And because
right. When was the last time you saw Harvey Dock not jumping in the middle of two guys at the end of the round? You know what I mean? That's how you let them know the round's over.
And to me, that's the unsatisfying aspect of this, is there really is a reality where he might not have been fully aware. He might have thought that there was 5 seconds. He might have thought that was the 10-second clapper. Like, we don't fully know. And then to see Donovan do an interview after the fight, heartbroken, it kind of sucks, right? And now, like,
I feel like if he rematches and he wins easily and wins handily, it does kind of just go away. I know it's not right in his mind, but it's not.
But that's his 2025 Dakota. So that's probably his whole year, so his whole year is this result. And then he goes back to camp. And then, I think it would be hard to get back up to train for this, right? Because now you've got like this weird bitter taste in your mouth. So now you're training for something, and Crocker is probably going to train way better. It would probably be like Oshaki Foster versus Conceição, where the fight's much closer than it was the first time. I mean, I just think it kind of derails momentum.
Sure.
It derails the momentum, because Donovan felt like a guy that was going to jump to the world level. And now he's kind of stuck at this domestic level, at least for one more year. And who knows who the names are going to be at welterweight? Is Boots going to stay there? Is Stanionis going to stay there? Like, by the time he gets to the world-class level, it might be him, and for all we know in the chat, Richardson Hitchins. It might be a different world. Our guy Will said DQ was harsh in my opinion. He could have given Crocker time and deducted a point.
I think that would have been the move. But again, I didn't see closely enough if Crocker went down and he was like, I will not continue fighting after that. If that happened, then I don't know what the call is.
It's just an unfortunate incident, right? Because it just takes a lot of the result out.
It's a momentum kill. It's a momentum kill, and I get it. But I'm looking at it from the optimist perspective, where I can't remember the last time a DQ loss was like, this guy's done. Like, I know he's a good fighter. You know what I mean? If he didn't even want to rematch this guy and just moved on, I think he'd be fine.
And then one undercard note that you should know about: Alif Noor Turian knocked out Shauna Brown, a lightweight women's prospect, in less than a minute. And Shauna Brown had just beaten an undefeated Australian in Australia. And then this undefeated Turkish fighter came in on the B side and knocked her out in less than a minute. Pretty impressive stuff. That was probably the most notable thing on the undercard.
I saw the clip of the knockout. It was a very impressive knockout.
Yeah, it definitely is like, okay, Caroline Dubois and her one day. That's interesting. Ton of fights this week. We're going to run through them probably vastly too fast because that's how we roll. First fight card we're going to preview is on Thursday. Golden Boy Promotions has your guy, Gucci Manny Flores, taking on, who is his opponent this time? He's taking on Jorge Lavia. Our friend John Pullman has a Mongolian flyweight who's going to fight Mario Hernandez at bantamweight. Grant Flores is in action, and Federico Pacheco, the brother of Diego Pacheco, will be making his Golden Boy Promotions debut. What are your thoughts on this card?
Definitely a fun little card. I'm looking forward to seeing John's fighter in a fight. I've seen training videos, of course, but I've never seen him actually in a matchup. And I don't know that I've seen Flores since I got to see him in person a couple of years ago in Indio. But I remember thinking that he was super talented, and I look forward to seeing him again.
I mean, I think Grant Flores might be the guy. Like, I think he has a lot of the aspects of like a Virgil Ortiz type Golden Boy prospect. He's not like your classic boxer, but he's got a lot of engine and a lot of break you down to him. I think he's probably the next organic Golden Boy superstar in the vein of a Virgil Ortiz and a Ryan Garcia. I see a lot with him. And Gucci Manny's his relative. I think, to me, Gucci's a big puncher. Bantamweight, he hits really hard. He lost to Walter Santabanez, and he's starting to regain momentum. But I think that loss kind of also makes you a little squeamish, because it's like, you're like, okay, he's a really good regional fighter, really, really good. But when he steps up to that next tier, what's his ceiling? Has he grown? Was it too early for him? So I think every single fight for me, there's a little bit of intrigue, because he had lost to Walter Santabanez, and he's kind of reliant upon power that you're looking to see, is he evolving? So I think that he always makes a compelling main event when he's in with a guy with a good record.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see him again.
Okay, then we have Natasha Jonas versus Lauren Price in the UK. I'm not sure if we can watch it. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are, I hope I can watch it. I mean, that's a super interesting matchup for women's boxing. I think Natasha Jonas is a pound for pound type of fighter that should be televised to as many people as possible.
Well, I mean, this also, I did a thing with Shoeshine Boxing jumping in right now, said, yo, fellas, have to give Lamont his flowers. He was robbed. For me, Natasha Jonas, legend in the sport, right? Especially for women's boxing. This feels like a passing of the torch fight for Lauren Price. I've been saying it for years. Out of the 2020 Olympics, she just felt like a special talent. And I think this is her moment this year to kind of go to that next level. And I think that this is going to be a fight where Lauren Price kind of says, this is my era. This is my moment. And I think this is probably the send-off, the sad send-off for Jonas. Maybe she does one hometown fight to win or to end her career on a win. But I have trouble seeing someone that's 10 years older than Lauren Price, who's entering her prime, who's an Olympic gold medalist, who's basically dominated every level of competition in boxing. I just have trouble seeing that she's going to struggle against Jonas.
You could be right, but it could also be, you know, like a Terry Harper against Dixon. You know what I mean? Where it's just like there's a big experience gap. You never know with fights like that. I think it'll be interesting. We did, however, lose the big dog for a minute, and I'm wondering if that's a technical thing or if that was like he got up and dipped for a minute. Yeah, Natasha Jonas has had multiple fights now that have only been on Sky Sports.
I had to go to the bathroom, and I was hoping that you'd get my back there, but it's okay. I'll come back and
I couldn't tell if it was technical.
Yeah, so with Dixon versus Terry Harper, I think that the big thing was the lack of amateur experience.
Yeah, it's not the same. I think it's an example of, you know, an older fighter with some wear that's able to beat an undefeated prospect contender just off of like maybe having a little bit more, having seen some more looks, you know.
I just think I'm all in on Lauren Price. I think she's going to be a superstar if she's moved correctly. And I think these are the moments that superstar fighters kind of embrace, are kind of like these moments. And I think this is going to be kind of her big moment at the present. What other fights on this undercard? We got Caroline Dubois back. So that's something. I know we're both pretty big Caroline Dubois fans. So Caroline Dubois being on the undercard is something. There's a really, really interesting, I think, 50-50 fight. Maybe you'll disagree. I don't even know if you know this. Featherweight Karis Artingstall taking on Raven Chapman, who fought Sky Nicholson. That's on the undercard. And Cindy Ngamba, who actually beat Tam Thibault in the 2024 Olympics, will be on this undercard. And she, to me, is a potential Clarissa Shields opponent at some point. So I think she's worth noting. But what do you think of the Karis Artingstall versus Raven Chapman fight?
I don't know that I know either of them, Bo.
Well, that's unfortunate. I think that's an actual. I think that's a real fight. Because Raven gave Sky Nicholson a real fight, and I think Karis Artingstall punches hard, but she's kind of struggled with that next level of professional. I can see it in your face. You're like, what the hell are we even talking about? Let's go to the next thing. I don't think we're going to touch on the Michael Conlon and the Harlem Eubank return. Do you want to touch on that?
I don't understand why Mike Conlon's coming back.
Well, I mean, if he wants to do domestic fights, that's fine. So we won't go into that. Here's a niche storyline for our niche viewers. Struggling to say words. Albert Betergayev, who I believe, wasn't he the 2020 Olympic gold medalist? I'm sure you know off the top of your head. I believe he was the 2020 Olympic gold medalist. I believe he beat Duke Reagan in the Olympics. He is facing Cruz Romero in Moscow. Now, to look at the show notes, I will type out exactly what I said. Why does this matter? Well, Betergayev holds the WBA interim junior lightweight title. Why does that matter? Because Lamont Roach holds the WBA junior lightweight title. So if Tank doesn't fight Roach next, there is probably going to be talks of Roach versus Betergayev, this great Olympian, and Roach has to figure out what he wants to do, because this guy's an interim who's fighting a week after he fought, which I'm sure is strategic, right? So I think that most fight fans should be aware of that, because more than likely this Albert's going to win. I can't say his last name, so we'll say Albert. But then what happens, right? What's the positioning? What's the leveraging? What's the next move from the business side?
Yeah, I had never heard of this guy either, but I'm looking at his resume now. Got wins over John O'Carroll and Jezreel Corrales. You know, those are both solid guys. Those are solid operators. John O'Carroll, I remember a couple of years ago, was like a legitimate contender. Beat Miguel Mariaga, beat Andy. So, I mean, those are nice wins for a guy that's 11-0.
And he holds an Olympic gold medalist. He's an Olympic gold medalist, featherweight. He's not a guy that's trying to have kid gloves. So, like, he wins this fight, I would assume they're going to try to make the Lamont Roach fight, and then it comes down to what the Lamont Roach team wants to do.
Yeah, I would just say, it's, especially if he's going to keep fighting Tank at lightweight, it seems like he's going to have to let go of that 130 belt sooner than later.
Yeah, and then Will said Price should win convincingly this weekend. Then we continue onward and upward. Pro Box TV has a fight that you and me are going to love, Dakota. It comes on at 4:30 West Coast, 7:30 your time. It's Arnold Khegai taking on Joet Gonzalez. What are your thoughts on this fight?
That's a fun matchup. I don't know. I think it's Khegai, and I'm not sure that I've seen him since the Fulton fight. I can't remember if I have or not, but
So he had one fight with Top Rank on the Angelo Leo versus Venado Lopez undercard. He was the opening bout on that card. So if you watched early, you would have seen him then.
Yeah, I just remember even in the Fulton fight, and I'd seen him a couple times before then, I've always thought this guy was really good. And then he loses to Fulton and has not been in obscurity, but he hasn't been at the top of the division for the last 4 or 5 years or so. And Joet, you know, we both given Joet a lot of praises. Every fight he's in, he just shows up. He's like a true pros pro, you know, a certified C contender for me. And I expect him to compete and make it a good fight. But it would seem that, you know, Khegai would have a little bit more upside than Joet.
Only devil's advocate I want to say for our guy Joet is emotionally, I've seen this be very difficult for guys where you're in the Ruben Villa position. You're a number 1 or number 2 contender, and you're fighting the top guys in the division, but you're not getting the title shot. And it's like, it's hard to stay at that top level without the reward. I do think Joet's like one of the worst guys to face in this position because Joet's not going to cut corners. You know, he's coming to win. And Arnold's probably like, man, I really, really want that belt. I want a title shot. And Joet's the total guy that's not going to phone it in and be a tough cookie.
Yeah. Well, and I think also, you know, he's going to make it an uncomfortable physical fight at some point. As much as Joet is a very solid guy technically, I think what he's going to have to do with a guy like Khegai, who's, you know, got a little less wear, is just make it a physically uncomfortable fight.
Okay, let's go through the undercard. We got Luis Torres Valenzuela taking on Nicholas Walters. My guy, Jesus Saracho, taking on Louis Lopez. We got the return of Kelvin Davis. We got Eros Correa. We got Kevin Antaunne, a really good fighter. Justin Valoria on the undercard, and the pro debut of Emilio Garcia. Really a stacked undercard. Anything stand out to you on that undercard?
What was the first undercard fight that you said?
It's Luis Torres Valenzuela against former champion Nicholas Walters. Valenzuela is a fighter who's promoted by Samson Lekowicz.
It's so tough to figure out what to think of Walters and his comeback. You know, he was gone from the ring for like 8 years or however long it was, 6 years. And then I saw the fight with Adorno and it kind of felt like he won it. And it's like, he's not the same guy, but it looks like he's still a tough out. And it's been tough to figure out kind of what to make of his comeback and how far, you know, him in his late 30s, early 40s can go at this point in his career.
And the final fight, I messed up because you like going in order. Most Valuable Promotions is putting on a kind of Lukey and Dakota level card that we love. Regional Canada card. It's headlined by Lucas Body. Really good lightweight puncher. He's taking on Ryan Raxia. The storyline of the fight is this is Body's first southpaw as a professional that he's fighting. If you look at the southpaw champions, you've got Gervonta Tank Davis. You've got Vasil Lomachenko. You've got Zapata as an interim belt holder. You got Shakur Stevenson. A lot of southpaws. So to me, this isn't just about the stylistic fight. It's about how does Body handle a southpaw, because if he's 1 or 2 fights, as he believes, away from a belt, he's probably going to have to fight a southpaw unless he gets the call to fight Keyshawn Davis currently. So I think that this is going to be an interesting assessment to see how he does against a southpaw.
Yeah, I guess after the Silv win, it just felt like he would have been in a bigger fight or the big fight by this point. You know what I mean?
I mean, I think that they're doing a good job. I mean, they put him on the Jake Paul, Mike Tyson card, which is a big spectacle fight, and he's returning pretty quickly after that. That was in November. It's March. He's getting a hometown Toronto fight. He beat Silva, I want to say, in July. So, I mean, I think that also we just are
I think it was longer ago. Maybe I'm just
it was
misremembering.
July. So, I mean, this is his second fight in less than a year's time. I think it just was such a big upset that we want that immediate gratification of something quick now.
For whatever reason, that fight feels like it was longer ago than it is.
Yeah. So body patient, good puncher, sets traps, really like him. Undercard, we have Sarah Bailey, a title holder defending her belt, and Tam Thibault, who signed with MVP Promotions. She's a middleweight. She actually lost to Cindy Ngamba in the Olympics. She's someone that could fight Shadeja Green. She could fight Clarissa Shields, #1 rated Canadian amateur. There's lots of high hopes for her. Do you have any interest in that undercard?
I definitely do, because I think one of the issues for that weight neighborhood in women's boxing right now is just kind of a lack of talent pool and a lack of interesting matchups to be made without somebody moving up from a lower weight, like a Alicia Baumgartner or, Natasha Jonas or someone, moving up multiple weight classes to make an interesting matchup, just because the talent pool doesn't match the top of the division. It's a top heavy part of boxing right now. And so anytime there's like an interesting women's fighter between 154 and 175, I think that's just going to be good for boxing.
Okay, that's about all that we have this week. Dakota, why don't you let people know where they can support you? It's going to be a slower couple of weeks, and then we're going to be right back at it. We're going to have like a marathon March 22nd. We're going to have a marathon March 29th. And then April 5th, we're going to have another marathon. So we're getting like two smaller. Maybe we might have some 40-minute shows because we're going to get 2 weeks of kind of slower action. And then we're going to be right back to cooking. And then once we get to April, May's around the corner. In May, we got that big, I guess we should touch on that too before we leave, is there was announced a fight card in New York. I believe you may or may not be going to the presser, but it's a big big fight announcement, right? In New York City, Ryan Garcia, Rolly Romero, Devin Haney, Jose Ramirez, and Teofimo Lopez versus Arnold Barbosa. Do you want to speak on just that news and notes?
I mean, listen, bro, I love when boxing comes to my city. We don't get it all the time. We go long periods of time with, no major world-class boxing in my city. And so obviously this is a great event. As far as where they're doing it, I don't know how the fuck that's going to work, dude, because Times Square is one of the most visible places from multiple buildings in New York City. There's going to be so much free viewership in that sense.
Maybe they'll handle, like, we're a boxing show, so let's stick to boxing because that'll be something. But I think when you, hopefully, if you get to go to this event, that might be something they talk about, or that's something for the logistics team.
I just bring it up because it's kind of like an edge that I bring as a production professional. These are things that I've had to think through in terms of events. And if you're not from New York, maybe you don't understand exactly what it is that you've signed up for.
That's for them. What do you think of the matchups initially? Are these good 50-50 fights? Are these compelling fights? What do you think?
I don't think Ryan and Rolly's a 50-50 fight. It's interesting, though, for Ryan to get back in the ring. The main event for me is Teo and Barbosa. That's the real 50-50 fight there. From what it feels like as far as Devin and Ryan is, they're taking B-sides that are credible and tough, where if they don't show up at the top of their game, they could lose, but it's fights that they should win. Whereas, with Teo and Barbosa, I mean, that's a real 50-50. And again, I think it's, at least to some extent, it shows like the aimless nature of Teofimo Lopez, where he's been talking about all these big fights and, the type of taking a mandatory from Arnold Barbosa would have been so not in any conversation I've seen him in recently. And yet here he is, not the main event, fighting a mandatory against a really tough guy who's probably better than him and isn't as big of a name. So it's a lot of things in Arnold's favor going into this one.
One thing we need to touch on, we forgot, but definitely deserves mention because you texted me about it. Rocky Hernandez looked like a world-class dude this weekend. There was so much boxing, we forgot about it. But touch on Rocky Hernandez and his brilliant performance.
Listen, man, I just think in terms of, a more action type fighter, he looks like the elite version of that to me. I don't know that he's ever going to be the number one guy at his weight, but he's definitely at this point, I think, refined his style to be, a real solid, legitimate contender who could beat anybody on any given night. And I think, the fight with Shock was a great example where, Shock, we know his quality. And we saw some of what Hernandez can bring against Shock, even in a losing effort. So I think that this is a guy at 130 who will win a title at some point, who will hang around and is young. He's got a lot of experience already as well. So he's already, he's moving into that young OG category. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. So where can people support you this week, Dakota? Where can people get your thoughts and all that stuff?
Can always support me at the Slip and Weave podcast, ITR Boxing, the Lukey Boxing Show. Going to have Cordell Booker on Slip and Weave this week, so really looking forward to that. Check that out. Should be out on Wednesday.
Perfect. Well, that sounds great. We will see you next week, and take care, everyone.